how economics shapes global power. What makes a country powerful? Is it its military, its technology, or is it something less obvious? Its economy. The truth is, economics is the hidden engine behind global power. It shapes diplomacy, alliances, and even wars. Today, we're going to explore how economics isn't just about money. It's about influence, control, and survival on the world stage. Okay? Welcome to the channel. My name is Dr. Dide Adewale, and here we bridge economics with international relations to understand the forces shaping our world. If you ever wondered why countries rise and fall, or why some nations seem to hold more sway than others, economics is at the heart of the answer. In this video, we will cover 3 big ways economics shapes power, the size of an economy, trade as a diplomatic tool, and how money can be used as a weapon. Stick around until the end because we would also look at the battle between the US dollar and the BRICS nations. That's one of the hottest debates in geopolitics right now. Now, let's talk about the economic size, being equal to global influence. Like, how is that possible? So let's start with the basics. Size matters. The United States has the world's largest economy, and that economic dominance translates into global power. Why? Because the US dollar is the backbone of global trade and finance. Almost every country needs dollar to buy oil, trade goods, to service debts, exchange, and all of that. That gives Washington huge leverage in world affairs. On the other side, you look at China. Just 30 years ago, it was considered a developing country, and today it's the world's second largest economy, and it's challenging the US, nearly in every arena. The competition is high. So economic growth has allowed China to expand its influence, build military capacity, and lead ambitious projects like the Belt and Road Initiative. In short, if your economy grows, it means your voice in international politics gets louder. So, now trade as a diplomacy. How does this work? Now, trade is just about selling goods. It's a tool of diplomacy, the European Union is a perfect example. By creating a single market, European nations tie their economies to closely together, and because of that, if there can't be any war between them because there's so much at stake. Do you understand? A war would just be unthinkable. So you see how these economics of these different European nations has kind of reshaped the kind of international relations they have amongst themselves. So, and there's the other side, which is China, like the China's Belt and Road Initiative. So through massive infrastructures and investments in Asia, Africa, and beyond, China isn't just building roads and ports. It's also building relationships, it's also building influence, and in many cases, dependency. So you see here, trade becomes a kind of diplomacy and sometimes also a leverage for this group of countries when they come together. Economics as a weapon. But economics isn't always cooperative, even if, it brings trade as a diplomacy, it brings collaboration, market competitiveness, and all that. It's not always been cooperative. Sometimes it can be a weapon. For example, look at sanctions. Sanctions are classic examples. So when Russia invaded Ukraine, the West didn't send troops directly. Instead, they unleashed waves of economic sanctions, freezing assets, cutting off banks, and restricting trades. So the idea was simple: hit the Russian economy hard enough and you weaken its ability to fight. So you can see here that, economic is used as a weapon to fight. Tariffs, they're another very good example, and it's another form of economic warfare. When you think of the US and China trade war, tariffs on billions of dollars worth of goods, and you know, all this weren't just protecting industries. They were about power, technology, and who gets the lead in the future. Let's talk about the dollar versus the BRICS. So, and this thing brings us to one of the biggest questions. Will the US dollar stay on top forever? Let me know in the comment section what you think. But right now, around 60% of global reserves are held in dollars. That means the dollar is still king. So, but the BRICS nations, which is the Brazil, the Russia, India, China, and South Africa, are trying to change that narrative. They have floated the idea of creating an alternative currency to reduce dependency on dollar. So, why does this matter? Let me know in the comment section. But I'll say it's because, you know, if countries starts moving away from the dollar, America loses a huge amount of global influence, and which is not just about currency, it's about who sets the rules of the global economy. So for now, the dollar remains dominant, but the pressure is building. I would like to know what you think. Subscribe to the channel, leave your comments, like and share, so that I can know, you know, your ideas and your thoughts about this. So just a little recap of what I've been trying to say. Economics shapes global power, you know, and I've mentioned 3 key ways, you know, through the sheer size of a country's economy, through trade as a tool of diplomacy, and through financial weapons like sanctions and tariffs. So money doesn't just talk, it decides who gets heard in international relations. So it's more like social relationships as well, where, you know, your money decides if you're elite, you know, if your network is high and all of that. So same thing for economics and, you know, the power play, and, you know, in international relations, money kinds of, you know, it doesn't just talk, but, you know, affects how they relate. So in my next video, I will dive deeper into these tools. We will talk about sanctions on this channel, tariffs, economic issues, international relations issues, try to blend political economy, you know, and see what's happening in the political theater, and see how, you know, policies are kind of effective in reshaping relationships and outcomes, economic outcomes. So if you want to understand global politics through the lenses of economics, make sure to subscribe. You hit the like button, share the video to anyone you think is curious about knowing what the world is about. See you next time.